All right. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Birch Aquarium's live Aquarist Chats. So I am Ocean Educator Jose. I'm a pretty familiar face, and if you've been keeping up with our social media presence here at the Birch Aquarium, this gentleman right down here should also be pretty familiar to you.
Hi, everyone. How's it going?
Yeah, so joining us today is Eric. He is our live food aquarist here at the Birch Aquarium, and even though we can't be with you right now, we're going to try our best to be with you as much as we can. And Eric wanted to share a little bit about what it's like to be an aquarist, what it means to be a live food aquarist, and so much more about the animals that he loves and the animals that he takes care of. So yeah, Eric, how's your day going so far?
Not too bad, actually. Just did a bunch of my culture cleaning, and it's yeah, it's kind of a dynamic day. So, it's never really the same because it's kind of wherever you are, whatever time of day it is. So, but right now, everything up through lunch has been taken care of. And so all I'm doing right now are kind of side projects and keeping up with our baby sea dragon feeding, which I will talk to you guys about a little later on.
Oh man, that sounds really cool. Thanks for that really quick preview of everything comes. So I guess the first question is, like, how did you become an aquarist? You gave me some really cool photos earlier.
Yeah, so it really all started with my first trip to an aquarium. So I'm originally from the Bay Area, the San Francisco area. So my first aquarium was California Academy of Science, Steinhardt's Aquarium. And a little bit about myself, growing up, I was a little bit scared of lions and tigers. But when I found out that fish don't make any noise, I was actually, that was actually what got me attracted a lot to aquariums. And then from there, it was, I have to give a big shout out to, the late Steve Irwin. He and his legacy that he established, kind of really resonated with myself, and to see his family, continue it, in terms of wildlife conservation, it kind of gave me a little spark into, how could I, get started in terms of wildlife conservation. And from there, I spent my time in university getting my zoology degree. After I realized I couldn't be a vet, it took a little bit of soul searching, but you find that you do a little bit of volunteering, which I think many husbandry professionals can attest that volunteering, interning is definitely the gateway into becoming a husbandry professional, in my case, an aquarist. So what you see here, I started first at San Francisco Zoo, and then immediately went to the Marine Mammal Center in Sausalito, California. And there you see me, bottle feeding a California sea lion. A quick little disclaimer, at the Marine Mammal Center, they don't emphasize, any sort of human interaction of this level of intimacy. But because this sea lion was deemed non-releasable, he was actually going to another facility. So we want to get him acclimated to a human presence as much as possible. And then the image on your right is my volunteer position at Steinhardt Aquarium. So it kind of came full circle a little bit. And what was amazing, though, was that you kind of just take the opportunity when it comes, because you never know when it's gonna pop up again. And so, for myself, when I was volunteering at Steinhardt, that was one of 4 different kinds of jobs that I was actually doing. So I had my paid job, I had a volunteering job at my university's fish lab, raising Catalina gobies. I had this volunteer position, and then I would travel once a week, about 45 minutes south, to work at a local fish store, coral shop. So it was, it's a nice, I was in a nice area. And then, before you know it, you do your first interviews, and definitely get those interview experiences, because yeah, it definitely adds up. And I ended up, heading over up to Canada and now to here.
Yeah. So it sounds like you really got your feet wet when you were getting started, and that just led to more and more different opportunities, which it sounds like you took and you were able to keep taking.
Yeah, and I definitely have to give shout out to all the mentors that I had throughout this entire journey that continued to mentor me throughout my career and actually through life in general. So for all those out there who are looking to figure out what they want to do, find yourself a good mentor that will kind of teach you a little bit about what they've been through, what they're doing, and yeah, it'll put you in a lot better position than trying to do everything by yourself.
And in your time in all these different places, have you learned that there's like a particular animal that you really like taking care of, or a sort of animal that you really get excited about?
It's actually kind of shifted, quite often. But I've found that a particular species of jellyfish, it's called the black sea nettle. I don't know if we have an image, but if you end up Google searching black sea nettle, they're very beautiful animals. And my first time seeing one was actually at Monterey Bay Aquarium. They actually had them on display, and it's like unlike any other sea nettle. There's a interesting, just pearlescent type of combination of reds, browns, dark purples, and black. But yeah, there you go. But at one point, my favorite animal was actually the Garibaldi. Then I found out how territorial these fish can get, and I totally shifted away from loving Garibaldi, and now prefer the animals with no brains.
Yeah, Garibaldi are really pretty, but I feel you 100% on that. They do not play nice when you're in their space.
No, they don't. And yeah, it's though they're small animals, they definitely let you know that they're the boss whenever you're around them.
Yeah, that bright orange coloration really tips you off there. Oh, here's another really good photo of you with Jellies. Wow.
Yeah, so I kind of provided a unique array of jellies. So this was actually at my previous job at Ripley's Aquarium of Canada up in Toronto, and at one point I was actually in charge of one of their more unique jelly exhibits, which I had never seen before. So as you can see, most this jelly tank is round, and for the most part, jellyfish tanks are circular, but they're actually standing up. So, the jellyfish are doing this. But when I got there, the jellyfish were actually doing this. And I'm like, well, this is unique because now I'm working with dynamics that I haven't worked with before. But again, going back to those mentors, talking up the mentors and just, playing around with ideas. And we eventually got Jellies, to be about, almost a foot in diameter. And these are moon jellies. Yeah, it's a very unique experience, and it was pretty awesome to take care of these guys.
Yeah, it looks like you're having a lot of fun there too.
Mm-hmm.
And then here's some more moon jellies, but we're going to skip past that slide for a moment. Because jellies, you mentioned they don't have any brains, and their body plan is pretty simple, right?
Yep. Yeah, no, I mean, it's, a lot of people ask, how exactly are they moving if they don't have any brains? Well, jellyfish have a very simple network of nerves that will just keep pulsing. And for the most part, a lot of people are like, well, how do they tell which direction they're going in? For the most part, they don't. However, there are jellyfish with certain light sensing organs on the sides of on the edges of their bell that kind of give them a sense of orientation. But for the most part, like, let's say, the sea nettles or moon jellies, it's the specific design of the tank which keeps them going in a nice circular fashion that keeps them from hitting the edges and damaging themselves.
So they have their own ways of trying to figure out where they are.
They do. I mean, you know, out in the ocean, they've got a lot of space to drift around and to pulsate, but they always find their way of coming across your path, and you definitely find out when they have.
Yeah. Oh, what are these guys?
Yeah, so this was another highlight jelly that I ended up working with in my internships when I was at Monterey Bay, and they had a temporary jellyfish like highlight exhibit, and this exhibit was primarily all about like tropical jellies of the Indo-Pacific. And this species is well, its genus species is Cephia, and they're also known as crown jellies, because if you on the very tops of their bells, they're actually small little gelatinous appendages that kind of you know, resemble a small little crown that comes off the top of their head. And I mean, these guys start off, you know, like 1 millimeter, 2 millimeters in diameter, and eventually these guys ended up growing to maybe about, you know, 6-7 inches in diameter. And I mean, they're really, I mean, they're super purple. They've got an awesome purple color to them. I mean, they're just amazing animals, you know, to take care of, let alone, you know, to be able to culture them.
Yeah.
Because that's, you know, the majority part of the puzzle is how actually do you get them from, do you get a baby first and foremost? So that's the biggest, you know, challenge.
Yeah, these guys are really, really pretty, and I'm sure that it feels great being able to take care of a unique animal like that. We do have a question, and it looks like it says, "Are invasive jellies a challenge here in San Diego?"
Not so much. You know, we haven't had many encounters. However, you know, I wouldn't necessarily say it's been problematic, but we've had a particular species that originally started off in Australia, and you know, because of the warmer waters here, it's been able to actually find a nice little foothold. And you know, we still see them pop up every so often, but it hasn't become a problem of being invasive now.
So they're not like displacing other jellies. They're just here sometimes, and they seem to do well. Yeah,
I mean, you know, frankly, when it comes to jellies, a lot of it is kind of environment dependent. They, you know, I mean, you know, with warmer water, you know, you'll have certain species that will do a lot better than colder water species, and then, you know, it'll start to shift, you know, in your timeline of you know, when you start to see this one species versus the other species, and it can be predictable, but at times we've gone years where we haven't seen any particular species for some time.
So it just kind of depends on what the water's like here in San Diego, and then that's going to inform what we see. Yeah, that's actually really interesting. I hadn't known that before.
Yeah, you know, and to kind of connect it to what I do as my specialty here as live food aquarist. So out just on our shores, you know, I'm looking for a specific shrimp. They're called mysid shrimp, and they are super important as far as being a live food, particularly for our sea dragons that we have here in-house, because apparently mysids are like the only food that sea dragons will actually go after.
Picky eaters.
Yeah, they're incredibly picky eaters. Yeah, you can't just feed them live frozen food. It's got to be live too, so it's got to be moving around. And so we have a local species of mysid shrimp out here, and I'll hop off our pier, but I won't necessarily see, you know, large aggregates of them every single time. It'll actually be, you know, I might see them maybe once a month. I might see them, you know, twice a month. It'll vary. And then sometimes when we see them, it'll be in huge clouds, and sometimes they'll kind of be bouncing off the bottom of the sand. So yeah, it's very tricky.
It's very much that same thing of just kind of depends on what we're seeing in the water, and then hopefully that's right for what we need to find.
Yeah. So it's always kind of fingers crossed.
Yeah. And to that point, these guys have a really interesting reproductive structure, right? And that's something you kind of have to think about when you're taking care of not only the food that you have to propagate, but the jellies that you work with as well.
Yeah, so fortunately, so as you see here, you know, the jellyfish have a very unique lifestyle. They have both sexual and asexual reproduction. And so where you see you see basically the large typical jelly, what we call the medusa, there will be males and females, and then they'll release their sperm and egg into the water, and you get the little planula larva. It looks like a jelly bean, a very small jelly bean, mind you. And what it does, it kind of, you know, just explores the rocky surfaces or anywhere, you know, where it can get a foothold to develop into a polyp. And the polyp I will characterize it as a flower vase with tentacles on it. And that's where the live foods come in, especially, you know, if we're trying to raise certain species, because once we get polyps, that's always a huge hurdle that we've cleared. And so the live foods come into play where you're dealing with microscopic elements. And one aspect I want to tell everyone, so I'll be using the term micron a lot from here on out. And so think of this way: 1 micron, 1 millimeter equals 1,000 microns. Okay, 1 millimeter, yeah, equals 1,000 microns. And these polyps sometimes require food that are maybe 300 microns, 200 microns. So you're talking almost 1/10 the size of a millimeter. But yeah, once you feed up enough of these polyps and they become nice and healthy, they have the ability to clone themselves. So you can so polyps can either replicate and make more polyps, or what you can see is the budding polyp, which will then basically release what are called ephyra, which are baby jellies, which will soon grow up to become the medusa. Each budding polyp can, I don't know, maybe have anywhere from 10 to 20 replicate ephyra. And so if you think of it, I've told summer campers this one time, is I imagine if, let's say like, you, this one kid, and you had the ability to replicate yourself, you could make about 20 of yourselves, and then, all of you guys grow up into your adults. And of course, the camp counselors are, no, I don't need, 20 more of this kid. But yeah, and once that budding polyp releases all those copies of ephyra, it basically just has to have more food fed to it. It'll regenerate and then start the cycle all over again.
Wow, that sounds like very Star Warsy.
Yeah, it is. But it's super cool.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the one aha moment that I had to becoming an aquarist, to determining that this was what I wanted to do, was I got introduced to a bunch of little glass dishes, like glass bowls, that I was told, okay, do a water change on these, but first you have to pipette all the little ephyra out first, and then change the water, put new water in. I was like, sure, that's fine. I had about 20 of these I had to do one time. It took me about an hour and a half, and I probably pipetted maybe about a couple hundred of these little ephyra out. Came back the next day, and there were more ephyra in these dishes. I don't know, like at the time I was like, how is this possible? But at the same time I was like, you know what? It's pretty cool that these guys are able to do this. And yeah, there's something just uniquely satisfying about standing there, pipette one. Hour goes by, come back the next day. Oh, wow, they're back. Okay, pipette one. And so it was those little intricacies that ended up, that I found out that I enjoyed, that I was like, you know what, this is going to be the job for me. And I'm going to continue, finding those moments in this career.
Yeah, it sounds like you had a really good, you were doing a really good job at that gig, and we're really glad that we have you doing that here at the aquarium for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you've talked a lot about all of the different setups that you've had behind the scenes. So we're just kind of peel back the curtain here, so we can look at some of these. This is a lot of stuff here.
Yeah, so I know it can seem like quite eye-opening, but as a live food aquarist, I kind of call myself like the mad scientist, because you've got all these little splotches of water all over the place that are different colors that are bubbling all the time. But each element has its own place with what I do. So as a live food aquarist here, I particularly take responsibility for the very bottom levels of the aquatic food chain. You're talking planktonic organisms, and I have to feed those plankton other plankton, and so what you see here on the picture on the left, you see these kind of triangular cones in the background. One's orange, one's brown, and those are brine shrimp that we hatch out daily. So brine shrimp are also known as sea monkeys, and we hatch out the babies of the adult sea monkeys, and we feed out millions of these guys, and that's like one of the first stages. And this big blue pipe here is actually an apparatus that's recently come out that's helped us be able to harvest and culture these brine shrimp a lot easier. At one point, the entire process could take, I don't know, 45 minutes for a single cone. Now it takes maybe 15 minutes. And so, I every day I'll harvest a bunch of these sea monkeys to be able to feed to a lot of our filter feeders. You've got corals that can use them. You've got like small sea anemones. You've got the jellyfish, and for my case, I feed these guys to mysid shrimp, as I mentioned earlier, that get fed to sea dragons. So there's like a stage on stage on stage transfer of energy here, and then when you're talking about energy, you look at the picture on the right, and I've got bubbling bottles of brown water. For some people, it's like, no, shouldn't that water be clear? And I'm like, no. That is exactly the color water that I want, because in that are a microalgae. So a lot of people, when they think of algae, it's kind of like the leafy stuff, like kelp, like maybe like stuff that may grow on the rocks. But this is microalgae. You're talking single cell organisms in incredibly dense cultures. And kind of similar to growing your houseplants, you got to make sure they got their nutrients. You got to make sure they've got their sunlight, and you got to repot them when they get to a certain size. So the smaller jars that I have here, you eventually scale them up in size as you go from one larger volume to another larger volume to the large volume that you eventually will feed out of. And mind you, this is all on a small scale. I have seen live food labs that have been dedicated towards raising live foods, and what I have is child's play. It's nothing that you can that you can fathom, like with what little setup I have here. The larger setups is what I hope to achieve further on down the line.
So you're like a gardener and a molecular gastronomist on top of all of this other stuff that you do.
Yeah, I mean, to an extent, I'm no expert in nutrition, but that's but there's a certain level of nutrition that you have to consider whenever you culture these foods and raise these foods, and it's on a very basic level. So I try and incorporate one level of nutrition, and hopefully that trend that moves on to the brine shrimp that I feed out, and then that moves on to the mysid shrimp, and hopefully that nutrition then transfers to our sea dragons in this case.
So making sure that every step of the food chain has exactly what it needs.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And going back to like that brown goopy water that we were just talking about, we have a question here from Brandon. Mm-hmm. And Brandon wants to know, is the water for the aquarium pumped from the ocean? If so, do you test for contamination that might be dangerous to the sea life?
Yeah, so that's a very good question, Brandon. Yes, our aquarium does pump our own water from the ocean, and as far as contamination goes, uh, we haven't specifically tested it, at least not that I know of here, because a lot of times, let's say with the recent red tide that's happened, um, unfortunately, we only have some very basic filters, and as you probably can imagine, we've got that really red tide kind of also ending up in the aquarium as well. But here we're able to mitigate the effects, if any, by going to our bag of tricks, our Aquarius bag of tricks, and that all kind of piles on to understanding the biological processes that happen. But as far as testing for contamination, I do not know off the top of my head.
That's fair. But it sounds like you guys have a lot of different things and a lot of different experiences that you can use to make sure that if something does happen, it's not going to be able to affect the animals that we're taking care of.
I'll put it this way. The paranoia of hearing water falling on the floor is very real. It has been conditioned over years and years. So even if you're at home and you hear water ending up on the floor, which it shouldn't be, trust an Aquarius to be the first one to jump and immediately start wondering what happened.
And we also have another question here from Caitlin, which is super relevant. Do you raise food for other animals besides the jellies and the sea dragons? I think you touched a little bit on this, but
let's see. I mean, for the most part, a lot of this live food is very universal to use. Mm-hmm. I talked about the brine shrimp. I talked about the algae that I raise. Another live food I raise are copepods. I call them the bugs of the ocean. You're talking, again, going back to microns, like maybe 300 microns. But sometimes the babies of these copepods that we feed are 40 microns. So you're talking really small. But as far as raising other foods to feed out, I do try and raise the mysid shrimp when I can, and many fish will go after the mysid shrimp because they're a small animal that kind of darts all over the place. But yeah, for the most part, it's very the live food is very universal.
So same kind of shrimp buffet just for everyone at the aquarium.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes with smaller animals with smaller mouths will eat the smaller food.
That actually makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. It looks like, following up on that, Delaney wants to know, what is your favorite animal to feed at the aquarium?
Ooh, so my favorite one to feed right now are our baby sea dragons. I've watched them grow up from when they were eating a baby mysid shrimp, which is maybe less than 1 millimeter long, to now eating full-grown mysid shrimp, which are about 1 centimeter long. And to see them progress from making their itty-bitty little snicks to finally, basically being an adult, and really, chomping down on the live food. So yeah, the picture that you see here, our babies are February to March, 3 months old now. And they first popped out at about 3/4 of an inch long. And now the biggest one, last I measured, is roughly 4.5 inches long.
Oh wow.
And yeah, these guys are, for the lack of a better phrase, growing like weeds.
I mean, they certainly look like it.
Yeah, they're getting those adult mysids in them. They're pooping a lot, which is always a good sign, for me at least. Is that it means that they're eating. So every time I come in and see, lots of poop on the bottom of the tank, that's a good sign that they're eating.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear that these guys are doing really well. I think this is kind of an old photo, but
I mean, they basically look the same. They're just getting a little bit longer.
That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you were talking a little bit about like life cycles and stuff earlier. Did you have sea monkeys as a kid?
I did not actually. When I started interning as an aquarist, though, that was one of the first questions they asked me. They're like, "Have you ever worked with brine shrimp before?" I'm like, "No." And they're like, "Well, sea monkeys." I'm like, "No." And oddly enough, this kind of brought back, flashbacks of when my parents had the first fish tank at home. My mom had a little goldfish book, and I remember flipping through the book and seeing the adult brine shrimp, and I'm like, "What are these things? That looks really freaky. Those are not fish." And it wasn't until much later down, into my aquarist career that I finally realized what those were. But yeah, brine shrimp in their own right can be pretty cool, especially when you're trying to describe them to kids.
Mm-hmm.
I call them orange water droplets with wings.
Yeah.
That's basically what they are.
That's what they look like to us.
Mm-hmm.
And they look really different from like the cartoons.
Yeah, I haven't seen sea monkeys
That's
as
fair.
cartoons, to be fair.
I've seen them drawn as like pink monkeys with like fins, and it looks really strange and not at all like this.
Very, very mythical animals.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then you also sent me some photos of some of the other live food
Mm-hmm.
that we were looking at. So
Yeah.
these guys are the copepods that you were talking about, right?
Yeah. So the picture on the left, you've got the adult copepod, and then right next to it is your copepod baby. So that is the baby that I'm talking is about 40 microns in size, really small, and then the adult is significantly bigger.
Mm-hmm.
On the right hand, you have a picture of a mysid shrimp, and actually, if you see all those little small little mini kind of comma looking images, those are actually unborn mysid babies. And so a mysid shrimp, they're also known as opossum shrimp because they actually have a pouch that females will carry these babies in. And one day I was actually curious, how many of these babies do these females actually carry? And I kind of opened one up, a dead one. And I kind of opened one up, unfolded the pouch, and I was surprised to keep, removing one baby after another baby after another baby after another baby. And in this one, I think you have 12 babies in a shrimp that big, under a pouch that big. So I was like, you know what, this is pretty cool. For me to be able to raise these guys up, it's always nice to know approximately how much I may be able to work with, and to kind of play with numbers from there.
And you mentioned this earlier too, but these guys are all kind of like buggy animals, right?
Yeah, so they dart around.
Oh wow! So they move like bugs too through the ocean?
So they don't necessarily. So the little baby copepod kind of skitters around sometimes, but the adult, but the adult actually kind of darts around. So it'll be kind of one place, kind of just floating around, and then boom, it'll be another place. The mysid shrimp, though, they do swim, so they've kind of got a much more fluid kind of swim. But if they need to, they'll kind of dart a little bit here, a little bit there. But for the most part, yeah, it's that movement that usually elicits a lot of those feeding responses.
So it's like the food is trying to get away, but that's exactly what whatever is hungry needs to find the food.
Yeah, it's the food does try and get away, but at the same time, the animals that eat them are adapted so well to be able to consume them. You think these little copepods are darting all over the place. Well, so are the fish that are chasing them, and so are the sea dragons that are able to eat the shrimp. I mean, they're deadly accurate with when they got to feed, and it's like boom, you got it.
So it's every adaptation in play from both sides, where the food is trying its best to protect itself, but also everything that's hungry is also super adapted to eat what it wants to eat.
Mm-hmm.
And that must be something that you see a lot in your line of work.
Yeah, you know, and that's always a good sign for me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's always something I strive to do. As long as I see the bigger food eating the smaller food. If I see, like, the fun little factoid about mysid shrimp is they can be cannibalistic. So they'll, if they don't have enough food in their own gut, they'll kind of attack and try and eat each other. So trying to raise these guys has that added challenge to them.
All right. Well, thanks so much for sharing everything you do for the aquarium with us, Eric. Thanks for taking this time out to share everything with all of our viewers on Facebook. Thanks so much to everyone on Facebook for staying super active and super participating. But I think that's pretty much all the time we have, right?
Yeah. Well, you know, let me just give, you know, one last shout out to
Absolutely.
you know, my Ripley's Aquarium of Canada family. You know, I would not be where I am without you guys. So, you know, and to all husbandry, you know, teams out there during this time, be it terrestrial or aquatic, you know, we stand together and, you know, we're hanging in there to, you know, to kick butt. So yeah, awesome job, guys.
So we're going to be back on Tuesday at 10 a.m. with something slightly different. But until then, thanks so much for joining us, everyone. And stay home, stay safe, and have a lovely afternoon. Bye, guys.
Thank you much, guys. Bye.